left off, and we'll probably finish this today. Chapter 16, the dragon at the bar. This is talking about the dragon at Temple Bar, one of the entrances to the actual city of London. Actually, I don't know that there's anything in this chapter. There's not. Yeah, there is. Go to page 143. George has been attacked by the dragon, and he's now in a cone of flame that the dragon is blowing, or has been. And again, he's trying to wrap his mind around all this. And on page 142, George looks up and he sees a plane flying across the sky. And then he looks at the dragon. And he says, "You're not real." He points to the plane. "That's real. That's a plane. And it's real. And science is real. And jet engines and crappy food and pepper and salt, blah, blah, blah. Those are real. You're not real." And yet, where is he? He's caught in a circle of flame, a tornado of flame, if you will, created by the dragon. The dragon is inside that flame, and the dragon speaks back to him. Real. What's the dragon saying?
Of course I'm wrong.
Exactly. Okay? And then the dragon claws him on the hand. And we're told, page 143, George had never felt pain like it, but he had imagined pain like it. It was as if all the bone-snapping, hand-shattering pain that he had expected, but miraculously not felt when he broke off the dragon's head off the side of the building, suddenly happened, only 1,000 times more intensely. And we're told at the end of the next paragraph, it was pain past screaming. Pain so bad it suddenly became dull and distant, as if happening to someone else. And as darkness crept in on the edges of his sight, meaning he's about to pass out from this pain, he welcomed it like a friend, though he knew he shouldn't. And where he had felt fear and anger, he felt more sadness than he knew there had ever been in his life. And his heart slowed and shriveled under the world-crushing weight of it. He had felt fear and anger, but now sadness. We're not told why. George suddenly feels this sadness. More than he'd ever felt in his life. Okay? He senses the dragon stepping over him. The gunner jumps through the wall of flame and rescues George. Okay? Page 151, we get an image of the mark that the dragon carved on George's hand. All right? Edie says, "That's not good." George says he's going home. Edie says, "We can't go home." Okay? George hops a cab to go home. He just ditches Edie. And he gets home. Why does he go home?
So you can pretend like it never existed.
Okay, so he can pretend like it never happened. Why else does he go home? What does he want from home?
Comfort.
Comfort. Where's he going to get it? His mother. Only thing is, what do we find out about George's home life? Where's his mom? Where's his mom? Apparently, usually, off. She's out. She's an actress. At this particular moment, where does she happen to be? We are told she's in Madrid at an audition. And yet when she calls, or George calls her, I can't remember which, does it sound like she's in an audition? No. She's with some guy in a bar. Okay? Meanwhile, George is left home alone. Okay? Yeah, there's a neighbor who will look in on him. And George even says, I don't have this part marked, but we're told that George even thinks to himself, I'm not a latchkey kid, meaning I've got a key to the house and I kind of, do things completely on my own. How old is he again? He's 12. Okay? So he fixes himself a meal, peanut butter and jelly sandwich with chocolate milk to drink. And does he sit at the table and eat? Or sit in the kitchen and eat? Where does he eat it? His mother's closet. Where particularly? Where her suitcase normally goes. And we're told that's a regular spot for George. Why? Where the suitcase normally goes. So we're talking about a space like this right here. He comes over here and he curls up. Why? Why in that little tight confinement? It's protection. It's like there are 4 walls or 3 walls right nearby. Doesn't have to worry about anything right here. Doesn't have to worry about anything right here. Doesn't have to worry about anything back here. Okay? It's womb-like for George. Okay? He talks to Kay, the neighbor, turns the lights off, calls his mom. She asks if everything's okay, page 166. So you're okay, baby? No. Didn't hear that, darling. So you're okay? I'm fine. Why doesn't he say no again? It won't matter. She's in Madrid. That's a couple-hour flight from London, assuming she would even take a flight to go back, which I think the novel suggests she wouldn't. George is more of an irritation in her life than a blessing in her life. He stops her from being able to live the life she wants to live. Okay? He closes his eyes, he drops the sandwich, he knocks over the glass of milk, and we're told his brain shuts down. Kids lived through a lot. Okay? Chapter 21. Edie buzzes his apartment. Okay? She asks him if there's a back door. He asks why. She says, because that gargoyle thing is on your roof. And the raven is there too. So, they run. And page 177, George thanks her for saving him. And then he asks about the gunner. And she says, page 179, now you ask. Where is he? What's wrong? He saved you. He jumped on the dragon even though he was hurt bad. He saved you. Probably saved us both. George says, but he can't be dead. Well, how would you know? You were too busy hailing taxis. In other words, you turned your back on us. All right? Chapter 22, we then find out where the gunner is. He looks broken, we're told, the very beginning. He's made his way to the church that Dictionary Johnson stands out in front of. And page 183, Johnson asks him, where does your path take you? The long path? Got no read on that. But tonight? What does he mean, the long path?
Your future?
Okay, keep going with that. Because tonight's your future. He means the end. Where does my final journey, where does my journey take me finally? Okay, this is one statue talking to another statue. Got no read on that. What does he mean I got no read?
He doesn't know.
Doesn't know. Got no read is like I've got no bearings on that. He has no GPS that shows him what his end will be. Okay? But tonight, like Sneaky there, I need to be on my stone for the day's turn, or else. Dictionary, Johnson looks at the clock from the law courts and says, fewer than 3 hours to midnight. Better get a start then. It's only a couple miles, and it is only a couple miles from where the statue of Samuel Johnson is to the statue just outside Hyde Park. A couple miles as a crow flies. It's a little bit longer when you have to walk the streets. Okay? Johnson asks, and the children? And the gunner sits back down. And the children, gunner? Page 184. What must be, must be. And I must get my breath. And the gunner finally looks Johnson in the eye and says, the children are on their own. Not if you send a pigeon. Carrier pigeon, World War I. Okay? So, Johnson suggests send a carrier pigeon. That is, send a warning. Send a message to the other spits. So, page 185. We see this. We see this message to all the Jaggers. Watch out for gargoyles. You're a messenger, not a taint's tea time snack. Let me see where else. 23, I think we can skip. The only significant thing in 23 is they've got to get back to Blackfriars Bridge, but they don't want to do it up on the embankment side because they'll have to go back past another dragon. So George comes up with the bright idea of going down the embankment and walking along the side of the shore of the Thames. Hopefully, tide's out, which means there is a bank that they can walk on, and there is. So they start along the bank, and Edie falls into a hole. And when she falls into a hole, she grabs onto something, and she glints on it. And it takes her back to, we're not told the exact date, but to a period of time where there were frost fairs. Okay? Frost fairs happened for a brief period of time during what's called the Maunder Minimum. Maunder Minimum occurred in the late 18th, early 19th centuries, about, if I remember right, something around 1785 to 1815, something like that. And it was a period of time when the sun didn't quite shut down, but when the sun stopped having sunspots. The sun was at minimal activity. Okay? A period called the Little Ice Age. The Thames actually froze, solid. This would be like the Mississippi, freezing solid. Okay? So thick that not only could they walk across the Thames, but they would have horse races on the Thames. They would have, coaches riding along the Thames, all this kind of stuff. So Edie glints back to one of these, and she sees a man push a little girl down through a hole in the ice, and drown her. The little girl yells, "He's not what he seems." And Edie thinks the little girl is yelling directly to her. Okay? Later on, we're going to see the man that she saw push the little girl. In fact, we've already been introduced to him, the walker. Edie hasn't put two and two together yet. 24. 25. They come up out of the river. They climb up a ladder to get back up to the embankment. And we're told, bottom of 210, top of 211, one thing was good. One thing had changed. Maybe it was the jolt that Edie had given him, telling him that the gunner was gone. Or maybe it was pulling her out of the water when she disappeared and he thought he was alone again. But since he decided to take the lead, he actually felt less out of control. He didn't expect Edie would accept he was leading anything. But for the moment he was, and it felt good. He was less panicked because he had someone else to think about, rather than just worrying about himself. It was strange. Okay? What is the not worrying only about himself? What change does that produce in George? It makes him stronger. It makes him think more clearly. Okay? So they go to Blackfriars. George tries to keep Edie moving. And George wants to try to go underground in order to get to the pub. Edie yells at him, page 216, no, not underground. So George goes in, try and remember what they call this. George goes in a subway. Okay, a subway in England is an underground passing to take you from one side of the street to the other side of the street. George goes through one of these. What did the gunner tell Edie? Don't ever let him go underground. He doesn't say why, okay? But George goes under, and something reaches out and grabs him from the wall, and then something reaches down and grabs him from the ceiling. And Edie sees this kind of from a distance. And he's fighting this mass, and suddenly he punches it. Okay? Chapter 27. He punches it and is freed. Okay? They make their way to Blackfriars. And the Blackfriar speaks. He's up on his mount, if you want, above the entrance to the pub, the tavern. And the Blackfriar speaks, and they hear him and speak back, and he's surprised. Okay? So the Blackfriar lets them into the pub. They mention the gunner. He talks about knowing several gunners. Page 230. He opens the door, because George tries the door, and the door's locked. And the Blackfriar says, to the pure of heart, no door is ever locked. Seemingly implying he, as a friar, is pure of heart. That is, as a monk. Edie, you used a key. Edie suggesting they're not so pure of heart necessarily. Okay? So they get inside. They change clothes. He gives them a bunch of potato chips and rolls. These are like Subway sandwich buns. Edie makes a sandwich out of these. And they talk to the Blackfriar for quite a bit. Page 241. Edie's kind of trying to figure out, are you good or bad? Okay. And the Blackfriar says, I am what I seem, no more, no less. I am both a fat monk and a merry innkeeper, the hailest of fellows well met, and the watcher who stands at the road's fork. I am also a man who likes talking with men who like to talk. I provide mirth and happiness, warmth and cheer, absolution for sins past, present, and even, for a fee, future. In short, I can soothe your needs and ease your passage through this vale of tears. This vale of tears refers to life. Comes from a very old hymn in the Christian church written by St. Augustine in the 5th century, 6th century. Okay? I am a helpmeet to the needy and a bringer of quietus. Quietus is death. What's a quietus? George asks. A quietus, my dear boy, is a release, a discharge from the cares of life, a payment in full, as of a duty or a debt. Okay? So, they tell the Blackfriar about what happened when George went in the underground. Page 243. He asks, because he's no longer laughing now, he's no longer punning with them. The walls grew hands and tentacles, and a mouth thing on a stalk like a big trumpet with teeth. And this happened. Really happened, you say, to both of you. Edie, just him. George, but she saw it. What were they made of, these hands? The hands that clutched. Earth. Earth? Mud, clay, gravel. And they caught you, they touched you. George nods. He shows his ankle and his arm, which are bruised and red. Okay? And the Blackfriars kind of doubted. Well, something grabbed you. I can certainly see that. George says, middle of 244, some things. Quite, my dear fellow, quite so. But how did you escape it? I hit it. You just hit it and it stopped? You'll forgive me, but it hardly seems likely if the elements were raised to such a pitch that they found form, incorporated, that is, took on a body, so aggressively that a mere, again, forgive me, boy, could just slap them away. No, I fear this is a twice-told tale, a confection. That is, you're making up stories. George, it's not. They were pulling me apart, and I hit them like this, and they fell apart. And the monk sees the mark on the back of George's hand. Where did you get that? Page 245. Get what? That maker's mark. From a dragon. A dragon slashed me at Temple Bar. That's not a dragon mark, and if a dragon slashes you, young fellow, you get slashed, and you stay slashed until you're burned and there's an end of you. George, it did. The monk, it did not. It is a maker's mark. And you, young scallion, are no manner of thing to be bearing it. I don't know what a maker's mark is. Edie, I don't know what a scallion is. Okay? So the monk says, stay here, don't leave the building, don't leave the room, don't touch anything, don't talk to anything. I'll be back. And leaves. Does he address what a maker's mark is? Where's he going? He's going to go off to the underground to check where George was, to see if there are any signs of it, and maybe try to go find the dragon. So, they start to talk, and we get chapter 30, Dead in the Water. We find the gunner. He's made his way to St. James Park. He's about halfway to his plinth on Hyde Park Corner. St. James Park is just, what direction would this be? Just east of Buckingham Palace. Hyde Park is just about half a mile past Buckingham Palace. Maybe a mile. Okay? Page 251. The pain and damage was so severe that oblivion and never moving or seeing again didn't seem so bad. He hoped the kids would be okay. He was pretty sure the friar wasn't as black as he was painted. Not like there was much choice, and the strange girl, the glint, all that hurt inside her, all that pain she would give to those close to her. Still, she was all he could trust. The boy probably deserved better. Notice even here, as the gunner thinks he's dying, there's still a lot of distrust of Edie because of what she is. Okay? Chapter 31, little tragedy. They meet the little cherub thing in the pub. Okay? And he tells them, 255, when he says, trust me, Edie. Why? Why what? Why trust you? People wearing masks usually have something to hide. Okay? And George kind of warns her. And the boy says, I ain't wearing it now, am I? Edie, no. Well, there you go then. Everyone's got a mask of some kind, don't they? Everyone's not quite what they seem. Edie, aren't they? Is Edie what she seems? No. No, they ain't. Blimey, sit under a pub roof without ever leaving for 100 years. You see things, you hear things, and after a bit you think things. Okay? So, Little Tragedy asks them, who are you? Who am I? Who am both of you? He says, because I've seen a lot of things, but I never seen old Black stop smiling. The Black Friar is a happy, jovial person. And yet when Edie and George arrived, he stopped being happy and jovial. And so Little Tragedy asks, who are you? Does George know who he is? Look what George says. I'm just ordinary. I mean, today I can see spits like you. I mean, I hope you're a spit. Okay? And Little Tragedy says, it's not seeing us as we are what makes you different. We've seen people who can see us before. Edie, what happens to them? Don't know. They don't usually hang around for long. I think they got. I think they get got. Got by what? Don't know. Something gets them because they don't come back. Edie, cheerful. In other words, that doesn't bode well for my future. I'm not saying they get snuffed out, mine. Not necessarily. There's other places to go than popping your clogs. Other places. I'm just saying they maybe go there. George, to other places? Edie, what other places? Other heres. What have we been told about London? Okay. Is the London George is in now the London George was in 2 days before? No. Is the London Edie is in now the London she was in 2 days before? Yes. Yes. In fact, we find out at the end of the novel, when Edie tells us, George, the little girl I saw on the Frost Fair that was being drowned by the walker, that was me. Okay, and that was at least 100 years ago. What other hears? The little boy, Little Tragedy says, I'll tell you if you touch me. Well, she's a glint, isn't she? If she touches me, she'll know. Know what? Know if something bad happened to me. If she can tell me that, then I'll tell her about the other places. Do you think something bad happened to you? I don't know. I'm just showing you what I feel like. Two people, two types of people, and I don't feel right. Like I'm made wrong. So if you glint me, you can see if I'm made proper, or if something bad happened that I don't know about. George says, don't do it. And he explains why. All the other statues, the Sphinxes, the Gunner, all of them are frightened of you. Or at least they really don't like being around you when you glint. So it's not right. Him wanting you to do this. And the boy says, you think it's a trap? You're joking. Are you saying we can't trust the Black Friar? Of course you can trust him. Just as long as you trust him never to be what he seems. So what does the Black Friar seem to be? You know. Later on, in fact, the gunner's going to think, I hope they can trust him, because he's not quite sure. Chapter 33. The Black Friar comes in. Okay. And she looks in the mirrors that are on the opposite side of the little alcove they're in. In bottom of 262, she saw with more relief than she'd expected that it was not blazing a warning. That is, she pulls out her sea glass. And what is her sea glass? It's a bottom of a bottle that broke off from the bottle, but it's been worn smooth by being washed in and out with the waves. So there's no sharp edges. Okay? Then she sees her sea glass blazing somewhere else. She sees its reflection in the mirror. And there, there's like all kinds of light coming out of it. She looks at her hand again and it's dull. She sees the reflection in the mirror and it's blazing. She sneaked another look at the two mirrors, and as she stepped back, she saw the mirrors reflecting each other off into infinity. Then she saw, or thought she saw, something way down toward the end of one of those mirrored tunnels. Something like a black bowl. More familiar than that somehow, but it must be a bowl because there was a knife lying beside it. This is going to be important if you pick up one of the other books. Do you have anything to confess? The Blackfriar says. In other words, have you done something you shouldn't have done? So the monk says, I've been out walking, page 264. You disturbed the clay in a way things have not been disturbed for a long, long time. Much longer time than I've been standing on this building, for example. You, my boy, have roused the hunger of unmade things. What's the driving urge of taints? What do taints want? That sense of purpose that spits have. Spits have that sense of purpose because they're made in the image of their maker. Taints aren't made in that image. They want some of that image. Okay? So what would be the hunger of unmade things? To be made, to take form, to take shape. Okay? So, the Blackfriar says, start at the beginning. And George says, I don't know the beginning. And you're worried about the end. That is, where the beginning leads. George, terrified. Okay? So the Blackfriar says, terror is not much use, young fellow. Terror stops you thinking, and stopping thinking is a good way to let bad things catch up on you. No, I think you better get over being terrified. You can be terrified later, if this ends well. That is, if this ends in a positive way, then you can deal with your terror. But for right now, you better put that away. If you get terrified now and stop thinking, then the things that want to terrify you will already have won. Does that make sense? Edie, no. George, yes. Why does it make sense to George? So, you know what I'm saying is true, says the friar. If you didn't think fast, you wouldn't be here. And if you didn't have a strong mind, I mean a really strong mind, you'd be mad by now, wouldn't you? He doesn't mean mad angry. He means crazy. You would be off your rocker if you didn't have a strong mind. Because think about it. You're walking down London one day and all of a sudden, all these statues start to move. Okay? So, George tells him everything. And Edie looks at the Blackfriar while George is talking, and she notices his eyes start to change. Okay? Page 269. Edie has explained that the gunner had to get to the dragon before the dragon got George. And the friar says, the dragon and George and the dragon, seems almost perfect. Indeed it does. Why? He's alluding to the legend of St. George and the dragon. And he looks at George's hand again. And he says, it hurts? Aches now. It was worse before. And that was the hand you lashed out with? The hand that broke the carving on the museum? Yes. And the broken carving, what of it? It broke. And then this pterodactyl came off the wall. The carving. Where is it? Why? Why ask why? Because we don't know whether to trust you, Edie says. Oh, okay. So they talk about little tragedy, and George says about little tragedy, page 271, he's lying. Well, of course he is, says the monk. You've heard of the father of lies, Satan. Okay. Well, as you'd expect, he has plenty of children, and that little imp there, that strutting tragedy, is one of his byblows. So the friar goes on. You'll make your own choice who you trust, my friends. No coercion, no compunction in my house. It is, as I said, a place of hospitality. What did the Sphinxes tell you? So, George recites what the Sphinxes told him. Bottom of 272. The friar looks at them. Oh, dear, dear. You really have no idea who to trust, do you? Because George doesn't even know if he trusts what the Sphinxes said. You'd rather fight than think after all. George, no, I just want this to end and go home. Okay? So, the friar explains, 273. You have a day to repine and a day to repair. After that, the stones you have offended will rise up and grind you and crush you, and your life and very soul will be winnowed to the four winds on the great threshing floor, and a great fire will... George, what does all that mean? It means you have one day to both be sorry for what you've done and to try and make amends. 24 hours will have begun when you broke the stone. Don't suppose you know what time that was? About 3:40. Then you must reach the Stoneheart within a day of your offense, and it's already nearly the low 12. Tomorrow is upon us. Okay? So you have until 3:40 tomorrow afternoon. But he goes on, and he says, there is, as I said, a way, a marked way. George, and if I make my amends, it's all over, I'm safe? Only by making your sacrifice can you be assured of the easy Quietus. Any later, and you're only guaranteed the hard way. Okay? Edie, what if he doesn't find it? If he doesn't go to it at all, then the taints will undoubtedly catch him and make whatever the hard way is seem like a mercy by comparison. He must find the Stoneheart. He cannot come to it empty-handed. He must bring what was broken, the dragon carving. If you don't have it, you better go back for it. Okay? George says, I did pick it up, but I left it in my mom's flat. And then he asks, what is the Stoneheart? Could be anything. The friar says, what is the Stoneheart? Who can say? Bottom of 275. The way is always marked. Notice, way here is capitalized. He's saying the individual's path, almost like his destiny, is marked. And these are the marks of his way. Okay? So, these are guideposts. These are kind of geographical markers that he must hit on his way. He has to climb the winding stair. The winding stair will lead to the memory of the fire. Where the memory of the fire is caged, he will catch a fire, and the caught fire will show him the path to the Stoneheart. Another riddle, a map of words. Okay? So, next chapter, bottom of 277. Look at the mark in your hand, boy. If it is right, you are a maker, or if you are to be a maker, then you have broken an ancient bond by using hands to mar. What does he mean? You have broken an ancient bond. A maker is designed to create, not destroy. And he says, you've used hands designed to create instead to destroy. So you've violated some will or some rule of the universe. You have used gifted hands, hands made to make things, to break things in anger. All things that have been made, statue spits, taints, feel your power and the affront it has caused. That is, all made things. Know you're a maker and you destroyed. Even things not yet made will reach out to you and crave the form you might give them. So when the dirt and the mud and the gravel was reaching out to him, he is suggesting they were reaching out to be shaped into something. The clay cinched your mark and the gift you carry. Everything seeks form in a universe designed to break things down. One of the laws of thermodynamics is entropy. Leave that computer there long enough, and what eventually will happen to it? It'll fall apart. Everything falls apart. Okay? How do you know I'm a maker? How do you know you are not? What did Little Tragedy ask George? Who are you? You say your hand broke the dragon carving at the museum, and you say the same hands cut through the clay that was attacking you in the underpass. But you're the maker the mark says you are, or maybe you're something else. But your hands do seem to have power, wouldn't you say? What is George doing with his hands, usually whenever he gets in trouble? When the teacher Killingbeck was yelling at him, he had his hands stuffed in his pockets. And what was he doing?
Molding the plastic.
He's got that little bit of plasticine, that little bit of clay in there, and he's molding it. Right? He's making. He's just not aware of it. Right? So, George and Edie go off. Edie gets attacked by the grid man. George and the Fusilier come and rescue her. Let's see here. And we get chapter 35, The Impossible Door. They make their way to the Church of St. Dunstan's in the west. And the church is exactly as it's described. On one side of the church, there is a door. If I remember correctly, it stands about 15 feet off the ground. And on either side of that door are these two statues of Hercules, or something like Hercules. On the other side of the church, there is a door at ground level. There's no explanation nearby the church for why there is a door 15 feet off the ground or so. Okay? And on certain days of the week, a Russian Orthodox parish actually does meet in that church. Okay, so I mean, Fletcher's got all those facts right. So they get there and they go inside, and George meets the clocker, and he talks to the clocker. Clocker tells George, page 316, don't wake the girl. Okay. And George finds out that the clocker is cursed. He's been weirded. Page 318. And Tallyman, one of the weirded, so to speak. Okay. George is trying to understand some of the language the clocker uses. Clocker says he's a thrall. George, I don't know what a thrall is. Thralls are curse bearers. Okay. Doomed to walk the earth beyond natural span of years. Well, what do? I'm the clocker. My curse to keep an eye on the time. Okay. So they keep talking, and let's see here. Next chapter, we see the walker again. Chapter 37. George just starts talking to the clocker. They sat in the dim light, and George finds himself filling it with unexpected words. I said something bad to my dad. Most sons do. One day or another. Something really bad. I was angry and I said stuff that was bad and a lie, and I was just trying to hurt him. Okay, keep in mind, what have we learned? George is a maker. Saying the bad hurtful, hateful things to his dad is what?
Fine.
It's an act of destruction. And I did hurt him. He told me I didn't mean it. And I told him I did. And I spat at him. I mean, I was a kid. I was 10. And he left and drove off. And there were... Okay, so we're not told anything about why George argued with his father and why he spat at him. But he left and drove off. Probably this is after the father has moved out of the house. George stops. He looks at the peeling plaster on the wall. You see, there were tears in his eyes, and I didn't say sorry or goodbye, or I didn't say anything. In other words, the maker has destroyed something. What could he do as a maker? He could fix it. Okay? By stopping those tears. He wiped the spit off his cheek and said, I didn't mean it. And I was just trying to hurt because I was hurting. And I swore I meant it. Swore I would always mean it. So what do you assume George said? I hate you. Kids say it to the parents. Every child I know, all 4 of mine, I mean, I don't know, maybe my priest kids don't. But most other kids, have said at one point or another to their parents, I hate you, or I wish you were dead. He wiped the spit off his cheek and said I didn't mean it, and I was just trying to hurt because I was hurting, and I swore I meant it, swore I would always mean it. And he looked stranger than I ever saw him look. I thought he was going to, and then he left. He looks at more plaster again and wipes his nose. Don't know why I'm telling this, because you can. Everyone can tell the time. Nice little pun there. Sorry, joke, wordplay, lighten atmosphere, bad habit, apologies. Can tell the time everything, won't change anything. Time ticks on regardless. And then he told the clocker of how his father had driven off and never driven back because someone else hadn't been looking and driven into him the next day. Notice how Fletcher writes that first clause of that sentence. It just keeps on going. There's no pauses in it, no commas. And then he told the clocker of how his father had driven off and never driven back because someone else hadn't, there is a comma there after back, and someone else hadn't been looking and had driven into him the next day, and he'd been killed instantly. And so there was nothing left to say except a sorry that seemed as hollow and empty as a coffin. Now, no one was there to see it. To hear it. He said sorry, what? To the coffin. But no one was there to hear it. And then because he had got over the hardest thing, the rest of the words came easy. So you get this idea. George has been bottling this up ever since it happened. And he falls asleep and then wakes up and the clocker tells him, no harm, sleep good, thinking done by self. Now, read Blackfriars, your worries. No reason to mistrust per se, none known to me, any rate, but right to mistrust all. That is, no need to mistrust the Blackfriar, none to me, but right to mistrust all. Your predicament, wariness essential, that is, be on your guard. Take pinch of salt every time, self included. Take pinch of salt with me. What's he saying?
Don't always trust me.
Don't even trust me. So who can George trust? No one. If he listens to the clocker. Okay? So, clocker goes on. Memory of fire, hearts of stone, winding stairs, many things in London. Many things, but only one fire, only one great fire. Great fire, 1666, burned down almost all of London. So that nearly all of Shakespeare's London you can't go to anymore because it's burned. There are a handful of buildings that survive from, let's say, 1600. If you go to St. Paul's Cathedral in London today, that cathedral was built after the Great Fire of 1666. Okay? So, George realizes, the monument. The monument is this tower, okay, about 300 feet tall, I think. 311 feet, something like that, or 204 feet, something like that. Tall, that, on the outside, well, its diameter is probably the width of this room. Sits on a big square base, and at the top it has a metal, like a cyclone fence around it, and above that is an urn with a fake flame sticking out of it. And you pay £1, and you go up a windy staircase. The bottom of the staircase, the stairs are about this wide. By the time you get to the very top of the staircase, the stairs are about that wide. And the space is about like that. Okay? Because it gets narrower the higher it goes. So when people are coming down and you're going up, if you meet at almost the top, you got to press yourself flat up against the wall so that somebody else can get by you. Right? And it takes a few minutes to get up it. The steps are about like this. I mean, they're not normal, 6-inch risers. They're about 8 to 10-inch risers. So George thinks the monument. All right. He's thinking I should go. Page 330. The clocker says, nope, not a good time to be on the streets. It's nighttime. You should be in bed. He says, don't worry, the Russian Orthodoxes are early risers. You'll get up in time. George says, when the gunner saved me, he said something. No doubt, startling event worthy of comment. He said I'd got no idea of what I'd started. Man of perspicacity, meaning clear sight. George, no, he was speaking about something else, something about spits and taints. Spits, taints, hostile, uneasy peace always, equilibrium of distrust. Gunner kills 4 taints, equilibrium gone. Things out of balance, gauntlet thrown. What do you mean? Don't know. Not fully. Has happened before. Wars between spits and taints always on cards, in background. Is why some statues walk and others don't. The statues that don't walk are dead. Why? Because of a previous wars. Taints see just voids with no spirit, only lack and need to fill void. All right? Appetites, envy, green-eyed monster, etc. In other words, there's nothing there. They are a vacuum, forever wanting to be filled. Hate spirited statues. Hate meaning. Why? Because spirited statues, spits, have meaning. What's the meaning? They were made in the image of their makers. They hate meaning. Why? Because the taints want meaning. They want purpose. They always hate what can't have. But not worry self, if spit were to come beyond stopping. You're saying I might be starting a war? Only a might. Never sleep worrying about might. Why? Especially if beyond control. Concentrate on what can do. Understand? He's saying, don't fail to live thinking about what might be or what might have been. Only concentrate on what you can do. Okay? So, chapter 38, we see the walker send word to awaken the Minotaur. Page 334. Edie wakes up. George tells her about the clocker. He didn't tell her everything he said. Why? Because it didn't seem any of her business, and besides, he'd said it to someone, and somehow that was what mattered. What's being talked about here? He said it to someone, and that was what mattered.
The story of how his dad died.
I don't know if Charlie Fletcher has any religious convictions at all. But by putting this here, and putting it in the context of what happens very shortly in this chapter, and the people that the clocker referred to would be worshiping this morning in the church, I don't think it's an accident. Because what George has just described is confession. And confession is very big in the Orthodox Church. Okay? He'd said it to someone. That is, he didn't just hold it inside and think about it. He verbally said to someone, I did something really, really, really bad. And then that person died. Okay? So, they go out. Clocker sees Johnson. And they talk a little bit. And they talk about the gunner, and the Clocker suggests, page 342, maybe somebody should send a pigeon. Okay. Chapter 41, the Minotaur's awake. Chapter 42, they make the way to the monument. Okay. And they go to the bottom of Pudding Lane. Why is it called Pudding Lane? Because it is the lane where the bakers used to work. This is a very old part of London. A lot of the streets here are these little narrow winding alleys. Some of them so narrow cars can't go on them because they were only wide enough for carriages during this time. The monument, the height of the monument represents, if you were to lay the monument down on its side, where the fire would be on the ground is where the fire started. Okay? And like I said, I think the monument, it's either 204 feet or 311 feet. I think it's 204 feet and it's 311 steps to the top of the monument. Okay? So from the base of the monument, you lay it down, and 204 feet from that is where the bakery existed, where the Great Fire of London started. So they go to the monument. And notice they don't have 2 pounds between them. They only have 1 pound. So George goes up. But before he goes up, what does Edie do? She gives him her sea glass. She says, this will help you. You'll be able to see if you're in danger. Okay? George gives her his coat. So she gives him something, that almost helps her breathe. And he gives her his coat, but what's in his coat?
The dragon.
The dragon head. Okay? So he goes on up, and Edie starts to get a little jumpy outside. She's waiting in the shadow of a building. We're told page 354, right in the middle of the page. She was missing the sea glass more than she'd expected. And she's wondered, why did she lend him the sea glass if she didn't trust him? She pulls the jacket tight against her. She feels the broken dragon's head. Okay. And George finally comes out at the top and he sees the raven. And the raven starts going after him. Grabs hold of his shoe, pulls it through the railing, pulls the shoe off, and doesn't stop. Grabs hold of his pant leg. Okay? And then the gargoyle shows up. And George looks in the sea glass. And he sees what he needs to see. He sees where the London Stone is. Okay? Page 365 is when it's the next chapter that the raven starts going after him. And then the gargoyle. And then the gargoyle gets shot. And 371. They see the gunner. Or George sees the gunner because the gunner's gone and snuck up behind Edie. And the gunner says, you're doing a pretty good job there, kid. And George says, no, it's all because of you. 371. George says, I was just struggling, really. Sometimes all you can do is struggle. But as long as you're struggling, you ain't giving up. And that's the half of it. Compare George struggling here with when the gunner first met George.
George had given up.
George had given up because the gunner says, seems to me, boy, you got to make a choice. You going to run or you going to just cave? Okay? So, they start to make their way down to Cannon Street, which is where the London Stone is. And 376. Edie asks for the sea glass back on 375. And George says, oh, you left it? You're joking, right? Well, it's confusing. I was being attacked. I didn't think. He says, we'll go back for it later. We'll go put the dragon head on the thing, and then we'll come back. And what does Edie do? She turns right around. The gunner looks at George. 377. I didn't mean to. You don't understand, son. You left her heartstone behind. Her what? The sea glass. Her heartstone. A glint's heartstone is essential to them. It's vital to what they are. Notice, heartstone, Stoneheart. George, but we're almost there. And he's at the corner of the street. Okay? Pudding Lane goes right down to Cannon. And where he's looking is about, if I remember right, quarter mile, maybe half mile, is the side of the building where the London Stone is. He looks down there, and the gunner says, you're here. She's there. She's there, and she's without her heartstone, and she's alone. Now, what did the gunner think about Edie just before he passed out?
He didn't trust her.
He didn't trust her. And now, what's he suggesting to George?
George, go help her.
Go rescue her. After all, what did Edie already do for George? She saved his life when he was at his mother's flat. She came and said, you need to get out of there. Okay? Edie runs into the little square where the monument is. It's closed. And before she knows what happens, the Minotaur picks her up. Okay? Page 383. They get there, and the gunner notices the paw mark on the ground because the Minotaur has removed some of the asphalt with his hoof. Okay? George goes up, he gets the heartstone, and I can skip that part. Page 387. The gunner and George are talking with the walker. And the walker says, I don't need the girl, I need the boy. I need what he has. Why's that? There are amends to be made. He's going to make his amends. He's been trying to do that ever since he realized what he's done, or what he is. He doesn't know that yet. Okay, George is standing by, aside like, okay, I'm here, Why aren't you talking about me? You haven't told him? I ain't told him because I ain't sure what he is. All that matters is that you're out of order. He's going to make his amends. Damn his amends. I don't give a Spanish fig. Why does the walker want George? Does he want to kill George?
No, he wants him to use them to create things.
Does he? Or does he simply want the dragon head? So that the walker can put the dragon head on the Stoneheart to make amends. Okay? What are we told at the end of the book? What did the walker do? He broke a piece of the London stone off and thus violated the stone, and that's why he is a servant of the stone. That's why he's the walker. Okay? Page 388, the gunner. Way I heard it, you have to serve the stone because you offended it out of greed and wanting more power and all. The boy crossed the stone without knowing what he was doing. So his ignorance trumps my intelligence? Compared with what you must have done to end up as cursed as you are, he's done nothing. If I make his sacrifice, some fraction of my curse is lifted, and maybe... And he pulls out the figurine he took from George's room. I have his image, too, made by a maker. The stone may swap one servant for another. Can't let you do that. You can't stop me. And you certainly can't kill me. And the gunner blows the figurine out of his hands. You'll not claim his soul that way. Oh, so we're talking about souls being claimed. But when the gunner shot, it also hit the walker's sweatshirt and took care of the R.E. and the deer. And so all you see now is John D. Well, John D. was an Elizabethan courtier, okay, to Queen Elizabeth, and also a magician, an alchemist. Okay? Look him up. We've got all kinds of stuff left behind him. A couple of years ago, when I was in London, in fact, I got on a field trip with my students to Oxford, and they had an exhibition in the Bodleian Library at Oxford on magical treatises and books and manuscripts. Okay, one of the manuscripts was one of John Dee's handwritten manuscripts with all kinds of symbols and drawings and occult kind of stuff. Okay, I mean the guy was serious. So. The walker makes the gunner, page 390, swear by the hand that made you. What is he swearing? That he won't shoot the Minotaur. Okay? And so he makes the gunner empty out his satchel that has extra rounds for his revolver, and then he clears out the revolver itself. By the hand that made me. You know the penalty for breaking a maker's oath. Oath breaking's more your line, but I know the deal. Break the oath and you wander forever. No child is worth that. You can only begin to imagine the pain wandering brings. Chapter 47, 48, the bulls roar. They find the Minotaur. Page 403. George and the gunner finally find the Minotaur, and the gunner says, you have a choice. George says, what choice? I haven't chosen anything. Page 404. Yeah, you have. You've chosen a lot, son. You're here. You could be at the stone, putting your world to rights, but you're here. In other words, you went off to save Edie. And what else? He describes George, to George, standing taller you are, taller and straighter than I first saw you. You ain't apologizing for yourself. You're fighting. In other words, he seems to be suggesting, George, you're becoming a man. I'm just trying to stay alive. No. If you was doing that, you'd be at the stone making your amends, not thinking about anyone else. Not with me trying to help her. You're fighting because you got something to fight for. The mark is what got you in trouble, but it's also what might get you out of it. The mark says you might be a maker. George, I'm not a maker. I don't make anything. Meanwhile, he's playing with the piece of plastic or plasticine in his pocket. You may not know what you are, but I'll tell you what. The taints know, and after I seen you with that dragon at Temple Bar, I think I know it. It's in your blood. It's in your bone. You done well, son. You look to be pretty dodgy when I first saw you. But it just goes to show, it's like Jagger used to say in his studio, it's not just the clay, It's what you make of it. Okay? Chapter 51. We find out the gunner kept one shell in a chamber. In 411, the walker says, but you swore. Too clever by half, the walker. You want to, the gunner says this to George. You want to fool a bloke who thinks he's made of brains? Try something simple. Kept my thumb over one chamber. But you broke your oath. My choice. The girl didn't sign up for this. Can't let it happen. What does he mean, my choice? What does the gunner choose?
Sadie.
Okay. What does that choice entail? Wandering forever. Right? But you don't want to hear it. Why doesn't he want to hear it? Doesn't make any difference. Okay? So he shoots the Minotaur. But he misses. George, you can't miss. You're the gunner. Okay? Page 413. George says, shoot him again. Out of bullets. Remember? But how then are you going to rescue her? Notice what George assumes on the part of the gunner. It's your job to save people. Dunno, son. I mean, with another bullet, maybe I can blow him into tomorrow, but we'll be long gone. Without a round to put up the spout, he'll rip me open from stem to stern. And you and all. And you know what Minotaurs do to little girls? No. Well, best not think about it. So what can we do? Go down fighting? George didn't want to go down, fighting or not fighting. The gunner's attitude was tough and brave, but for the first time he found it annoying. He needed to think. He thrusts his hand in his pocket. He feels the plasticine. And he comes up with an idea. Okay, I'm a maker. Give me the shell. What? Do it. I'm going to make a bullet. You what? Out of plasticine. If I'm this maker, if this scar is the mark of a maker, then why not? I'll make a bullet. You're made of bronze, but you're soft enough to move. No reason why it shouldn't work the other way. That is, if I'm a maker and I want this soft plasticine to be hard and rigid, that is, if while he's forming it, he puts that purpose into it, it's not just the clay, as we were told by Jagger, it's what you make of it. Okay? So the gunner gets gored. George puts the sea glass into Edie's hands when they get Edie away. And we're told, page 417, as he worked, he thought of bullets. He thought of what they can do. He thought of what they'd seen them do. He saw them pulver. In other words, he's putting everything he knows about bullets into this bullet. Okay? He gives it to the gunner. Excuse me. He gets the gunner's gun, and the gunner says, "I." And then the gunner and the Minotaur fall over the edge. George and Edie run after them. Page 425, Edie says, "I." That is, hit the Minotaur in the eye. And he fires. And the gunner says, page 426, "Bullseye," as he kills the Minotaur. Now, tell me you ain't got a maker's hand, and just in the nick of time. Okay? So they head off to the London Stone. And what does George realize when they get there? Okay? They see the walker. And Edie realizes now who the walker is. Page 441. George asks, what happens? That is, I put the dragon head on the stone. What happens? It ends. You make your amends, the walker says. You return to your vision of safe, happy London, sans spit, sans taint, sans anything strange. Sans is French for without. And unexplainable to disturb your soft, happy life. But I'll remember all this, right? And the gunner says, Edie, get George to the stone. Wait, but if I put this on the Stoneheart, are you saying I forget you all? That's not the Stoneheart. It's the London stone. And yes, you return to your even more irrelevant existence. Why does the gunner want Edie to get George to the stone so fast? Okay, not only because clock is ticking, time's running out.
To get him away from the walker.
Keep going.
So I didn't hear what the walker's saying.
Keep going. Why? What is George thinking of at this point? I won't remember you? I won't remember Edie? I won't remember the gunner? Page 442. George says, I'm scared. Edie, everyone's scared. If I do this, I think I won't. I mean, you'll be, or I'll be in a London where none of this makes sense because he won't see any of it. So I won't believe you. I won't know you. I mean, you'll still be in this un-London, this scary place, and you'll be alone. Edie, I'll be fine. Hurry up. You're not scared of anything. I know, so I'll be fine. Go on. What if the Sphinxes gave me an answer that has two meanings? It'd be like them. And she says, come on, George, get a move on. And she mentions the friar. And George thinks, the mention of the friar jolted George, and it jolted him because he remembered what the friar had said about sphinxes spinning riddles even when they were answering. And he thinks of the friar again, and he suddenly comes, what could be better for them than an answer with two meanings, except one with three? What is the Stoneheart? Who can say? Edie, wait, he says. The Stoneheart and the stone at the heart of London, what if they are two different things? Instead of two ways of describing the same stone. What if this London stone is the stone at the heart of London, but the Stoneheart is something else entirely? Like what? I don't know. No time, George. But seriously, what if there's more to this than me just making good what I broke and going home to extra maths on a bunch of kids who don't like me any more than I like them? I mean, look, Edie, and he shows her his hand. She says, George, there's no time for what ifs. There's no point us both being stuck here, right? So come on, George. You're safe now. You get to go home. Okay? No one gets to go home, he said, but you do. Yeah, you're special, George. You get to do the thing they said you couldn't. You beat them. George, I'm not leaving you alone here. You idiot, you could be free, but you'd be stuck here, alone. I got on fine before I met you. No, you didn't. Notice Edie doesn't say, yes, I did. She says, so what? If you forget about all this, you wouldn't know about it. You wouldn't even have to feel guilty. And she hits him, open-handed, slaps him across the face. And he just stood there. And she hits him again. And he just looked at her, something hardening in his eyes. And she says, go. And this time, she makes a fist. And he told her, I told you never to hit me again. He goes over, and the gunner says, it'll be all right. And he makes it look like he puts it on the stone, and then he comes back to Edie and pretends that he doesn't know who she is, but reveals himself. Says, it's me, Edie, 447. Says, thought I'd keep a hold of this. See how hard the hard way really is. You don't get rid of me that easily. So, bottom of that page, the walker. So you found your own little stone heart. Okay? The walker and the gunner go off in the walker's mirrors. Okay? And that's when Edie tells George, bottom of 449. After George says, it's okay, it's our turn now. Our turn what? We have to rescue him. Okay, remember George said, but how are you going to rescue Edie? We'll have to rescue him. Edie says, George, I saw him, the one that took the gunner. I saw him before. You saw the walker before today? About 100 years before today, maybe 200. What? I saw him when I glinted in the Thames. I saw him at the Frostbury, but you can't have. I did. He was drowning someone. It was me. Well, we can't let that happen, can we? Says George. Okay, and then he has a little page about the acknowledgments. If you want to find out about the rest, you got to read Iron Hand, which is the next book, and then the third one after that.